So welcome everyone to the UN Overview Workshop for the Global Rotaract Model United Nations. This workshop is made possible through the Global Rotaract Club, the United Nations Association of Australia Young Professionals Queensland Division, and the UN75 representative. Please note that this workshop is being recorded for internal feedback and can also be provided upon request. We would like to acknowledge that this event is being hosted on the Turrbal and the Yuggera lands. We acknowledge that the elders of the stolen land, past, present, and the young emerging leaders in this community. We'd also like to acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. My name is Ishara Sahama, and I'm the Events and Programs Officer at the UNAA Young Professionals Queensland Division. I will be your MC for this workshop. So we have a full schedule. It includes 2 presentations, one from Dali and one from Joel, an interactive session with all of our delegates around the UN75's dialogue on building a better future for all. And then finally, we'll end with a Q&A. So if you have any questions for our guest presenters, there will be a session in the workshop to ask them. And this session will happen closer to the end of the workshop. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce I'd like to go straight into our first presentation by Dali ten Hove, which will start with a short video. So during this time, I will turn off my video and ask Joel to also turn off his while I play the first video.
No country, no community is able to solve the complex problems of our world alone. We need to come together, not only to talk, but to listen. It is absolutely essential that you all join the conversation. We need your opinions, your strategies, your ideas for us to be able to deliver better for the people of the world that we must serve.
All right, and Dali, you can take it away. So if you want to put your video on and commence your presentation, thank you.
Sure, thank you very much, Ishara, and thank you for playing that video from the SG. So hi everyone, pleasure to be here with you. My name is Dali. I work for the Office of the Special Advisor to the Secretary General for the 7th anniversary of the UN, which is this year. Officially, actually, we had the commemoration of the 75th anniversary yesterday in the UN General Assembly. But so to mark the 75th anniversary this year, which is in and of itself quite a milestone, given that the predecessor of the UN, the League of Nations, lasted for about 20 years, the Secretary General felt that we shouldn't just do a regular birthday celebration, as the UN has done for its 70th anniversary, 60th, 50th. The Secretary General felt, as he says very often, that we are living at a kind of critical juncture in history. I think the pivot point is a term that he likes to use. We have a wide array of global challenges multiplying. Conflict is back up on the rise after a lull since the end of the Cold War. Inequality is rising between countries, although it is reducing by and large within countries. And so with challenges multiplying, including obviously the pandemic, and on the other hand, existing challenges deepening, like climate change, becoming more entrenched, you know, with challenges like climate change, the longer that you do not take care of them, the more difficult it becomes to tackle them down the line. And so against this backdrop, at the same time, appetite from the international community in coming up with collective solutions to these collective problems is diminishing, which the Secretary General refers to as the paradox of our time. Even though there's more and more global problems, there's less and less global action to tackle them. So again, the SG felt that it wouldn't be right to tap ourselves on the back and congratulate ourselves for making it to 75. He felt that we should do something new and bold to stir global action to tackle our shared challenges. And so the idea that, that he came up with was, for the first time in the history of this organization, let's go out there into the world and ask for people's perspectives, for their ideas, for their priorities, for the future. What is it that people think about the state of their communities, their countries, the world at large? What is their vision, their ideal vision for the future they want? And how do they think that we can get there? And what are the key problems that are hampering the realization of your vision for the future? And so in January, at the beginning of this year, the Secretary General launched the UN75 initiative, a series of consultations lasting throughout this year to hear from people all around the world. We do this in lots of different ways. Primarily, the two flagship streams of the initiative are a survey. It takes 1 to 2 minutes to fill, but also what we call UN75 dialogues, which is what will be happening right after in a couple of moments. So actually, we have published the report of our findings so far between January and September yesterday. So you're very welcome to go and see that. There will be another report in January when the initiative ends. And that will be taken by an advisory council to the SG to devise a roadmap for the next 25 years of the UN, which will be released around summer of next year. So really, this is the first opportunity in the history of the UN, and probably this will not happen again until maybe the 100th anniversary of the UN. But so this is a unique opportunity to contribute directly to the work of the UN and to shaping the future of the organization. So thanks very much for taking part of that. I'll also put a link to the survey in the chat in a couple moments. You're very welcome to take that. And yes, looking forward to your perspectives through this dialogue. Thanks.
Thank you, Dali. I'll now introduce Joel, who will do his part of the presentation on the UN and the UNCLOS overview. So for that, he has a couple of slides, which I'll screen share for, and I'll turn off my video for it.
Thanks, Ashara, and thanks, Dali, for that excellent introduction. And I'd like to pick up on a key point you made about opinions, strategies, and ideas. We are here to share those three things. And I think it's really awesome that UN75 is happening. So really quickly, my name is Joel Lindsay. I'm the Queensland president of the UNYPs, Young Professionals. And what we aim to do essentially is, using the Sustainable Development Goals, which is the SDG 2030 agenda, engage young Australians in the work and values of the United Nations. And what a better time to do it than UN75, which is about engaging all of us in the conversation about what the future of the UN and together our world should be. So using the SDGs, we aim to promote development opportunities, career pathways, and really engage young people in the work and values of the large UN system. Next, please, Ashara. So I'm going to give you a really brief and very high-level overview of the UN and UNCLOS. I'm sure some of you know more than I do. I'm an enthusiast, and the system is very complex and very large, hence it being described as the largest bureaucracy in the world. But what we're aiming to do here tonight is to go very briefly through the large overview of the system, so you get a rough idea of how the whole thing works, and then have a quick chat about UNCLOS before we delve into some questions and discussion about UN75 and your MUN program in general. As Dali mentioned, this is the 75th birthday of the United Nations, meaning in 1945, the treaty was ratified to set up the United Nations, and it began operations. Work was underway all throughout World War II to set up the UN and its governing documents, but it was finally signed and agreed to in 1945. Dali also mentioned that the UN really was built out of the broken hopes and dreams of the League of Nations, a collection of powerful states at the start of the century that sort of never really got off the ground for a few years, and then due to some key countries refusing to join in the early 20s, sort of fell apart. And then, as we all know, 30s, Great Depression, and then end of the 1930s, World War II breaks out, engulfing Europe, America, the Pacific, Australia, etc., most of the world. 1945, UN starts, and for the next 75 years, focuses on peace and security, human rights, the rule of law, especially international law, and developing, and clearly with a focus on developing nations. The core values of the United Nations are integrity, professionalism, and respect for diversity, reflecting the fact that it is 193 member states. At current count, 193 sovereign nations are members of the United Nations, which is vital because the strength and value posed by the UN as an organization is the collective wealth of knowledge and effort and spirit and hope of those 193 countries, and people like us and people like you joining tonight. The key principles of the United Nations are the sovereign equality of every state. All member states must obey the UN Charter. There's a desire to, by any means, solve disputes by, in a peaceful manner, and linked to that, avoid the use of force at all costs. And clearly with Security Council resolutions, there are some key examples of where force is allowed, but the UN overall strives to solve all disputes peacefully, hence the focus on peace. Next, please. So as I said, it is the largest ever international organization ever created, and likely will be for the foreseeable future. Has many principal organs, programs, specialized agencies, all of which have their own organizational structures, leadership, budget, key functions, and core work. It's an extremely complex system, but all the components strive to work to the UN's core values and principles. So 6 principal organs and 7 family organizations that sit under those 6 principal organs. Namely, General Assembly, the Security Council, Economic and Social Council, also called ECOSOC, the Secretariat, which is where the Secretary General and Dali operates, the International Court of Justice, and the Trusteeship Council. Probably most famous of those 6, General Assembly is the massive room in New York where all the nations representatives sit, and Donald Trump will be speaking, I think in a few days' time, to UNGA, which is the UN General Assembly. It's where Greta spoke last year. It's where leaders go to speak to make their pitch to the world and really show their nation's credentials on the global stage. Security Council, probably second most famous. It's a rotating membership of nations. There's a core group of 5 who are always on there with a permanent membership, and they get veto rights over decisions, which has been a historical roadblock for some decisions. And one of the things I think will be a key part of your UNCLOS South China Sea deliberations over the coming weeks. Importantly, I should mention ECOSOC. ECOSOC, the Economic and Social Council, comprises a lot of important groups that sometimes people don't realize are actually parts of the United Nations, including the IMF and International Monetary Fund, and most recently, and probably most in the news, the World Health Organization. WHO is a function of the United Nations, and it's funded by member states' contributions and some private groups like Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. But essentially, and importantly, it is a part of the United Nations. So as a family, when the WHO is criticized and attacked for mistakes it's made under, in the COVID pandemic era, the entire United Nations organization is being brought into question. And the WHO has made mistakes, but it's also incredibly vital and does incredible work across the world, especially in developing countries with vaccines, basic sanitation and health programs, and really will be a vital organization to keep going as we move out of COVID. So as you can see, there's a lot of groups and a lot of interlinking work, but the overarching framework for how the United Nations is marketing their brand and their work currently is called the SDG agenda, Sustainable Development Goal 2030 agenda. So next slide, please, Shara. So you may have heard of the Millennium Development Goals. They were a set of goals stating by 2000, we'd like to have these things happen. And they were your big ones about poverty, immunization, minimum living standards, education, health for the world's poorest people. The MDGs had some successes, but were largely seen as potentially not as effective as they should have been. So it decided a new and more engaging agenda was required. Hence the desire to create the SDG agenda. So in 2015, 193 member states adopted the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And just to, it might seem like it's a bit of a marketing exercise, but it actually was a incredibly well-organized and hard-fought campaign to get the SDG agenda agreed. I think, of the hundreds of potential goals that were put forward, there's only 17 final ones, and they really encompass all the work and values of the United Nations. Some member states wanted less, claiming that, this many goals is sort of hard to focus on. And some states said there's at least 50 or 60 that you had to have. So to get a set of 17 goals that all member states agreed to work towards is quite an incredible feat in itself. The agenda aims to bring together governments, business, and civil society, which is us and UNYP, to mobilize efforts to achieve the 17 goals. And here in Queensland and also across the nation of Australia, we in the UNYPs use the SDG agenda to really focus attention on the work and values of the UN. And just as a committee, the YP group focuses mostly on climate action, gender equality, particularly for Australia, reconciliation with our Indigenous people, and the rights and health of refugees and asylum seekers. So the SDG agenda to 2030 is really how we communicate our work and the goals of what we're striving for. Thank you. UNCLOS, or the UN Convention for Law of the Seas. UNCLOS is a nickname that it's generally given because UN is famous for having long titles for things. Also referred to in conversation as Law of the Sea Convention and the Law of the Sea Treaty, have been in effect since 1982. Just some trivia, it used to be called the Law of the High Seas, which has some cool pirate links if you're a piracy fan, but it's now UNCLOS. And this convention defines the rights and responsibilities of nations with respect to the use of the world's oceans, and provides guidelines for businesses, environment, and management of marine natural resources. So it sounds like this makes sense that it should have always been the case, but UNCLOS came into a very sort of confusing and cloudy space where it wasn't really sure who's in charge of what, especially how far off your physical edge of your nation into the ocean, your territory for fishing rights, etc., extended. For a long time, it was roughly 3 miles, which was, funnily enough, measured by, I think it was in the 1700s, a cannon shot. How far a cannon could shoot from land out to sea was your exclusive marine zone. That didn't really make sense for a lot of nations, especially that had quite, involved fish life, like a lot of Pacific Island nations. Their territory and their life extends well past their land boundaries. And especially in the 1940s, the President of the United States decided America's economic bounds would actually go all the way out to their continental shelf, not just 3 miles off the shoreline. So that sort of caught on, and other states decided to claim similar territory. Some South American states decided 200 nautical miles would be a good economic exclusive zone. And currently, there's no one set distance that is considered standard across the world. Some countries use 12 miles, some countries use 200 miles, some use less and more. And there's a really mixed bag, which will be an interesting thing for you to explore over your coming MUN week. So the working example for this week for your MUN deliberations is the South China Sea, an incredibly important and geostrategic region in the Western Pacific Ocean. Very, very heavily reported in the media recently. America is quite strong in advocating for what's called freedom of navigation exercises, whereby their Navy sails through what they understand and the UN understand as international water, which means it's completely legal to sail there. China is expanding its perception of where its maritime boundary ends. And where those two lines conflict is the source of much tension, which is what you'll be investigating in your MUN, which will be very exciting. The other interesting point for the South China Sea maritime boundary clashes are, it's not just international waters and the Chinese boundary that we'll be looking at. For example, there's competing claims for all the areas from nations such as Vietnam, Philippines, Taiwan, Malaysia, and Brunei, who are all expressing territory and resource wealth claims. To make it even a wider scale, the US has allies who it's expecting to support it in these freedom of navigation exercises, including Australia has been asked to please send ships along to conduct these freedom of navigation exercises. Clearly, the US has a role to play in enforcing what their idea is of international water, and China has their own view, and the intersection of those 2 points of view is, I guess, the entire source of conflict and your MUN topic. So it should be very exciting, and I'm very keen to see what comes out of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joel. So that concludes the presentation portion of this workshop. We're now halfway through the workshop, and this is where we ask our delegates and those in attendance to be a bit interactive, a bit curious, and to raise your hand if you have anything to add. So this is the open dialogue part, and before we begin, I will play a video. It's a 3-minute video around the UN75 dialogue, and during that time, as you prepare for the open dialogue, there is a link that we'll put in the chat box for you to enter the interactive tool, which you'll be using to input your feedback. So whilst you watch the video, you can access this link and sign up to the Miro board. But if you'd like to do that after watching the video, that is also fine. So in the meantime, I will play the video.
Secretary General of the United Nations. It's a great pleasure to speak with you today. My appreciation also goes to the hosts of this dialogue. We are in the midst of upheaval and face a dangerous contradiction, placing global governance at a crossroads. Transnational challenges are multiplying, from the pandemic we are facing today to worsening climate change. At the same time, the support to the international mechanisms required to bring solutions to global challenges is diminishing. 2020 marks the UN's 75th anniversary, just when we are facing this paradox of rising global challenges and diminishing global cooperation. Against that backdrop, the Secretary General launched the UN75 initiative at the start of this year to gather people's perspectives and craft an inclusive, people-driven agenda for the next quarter century. The UN is an organization of member states, but as the first 3 words of our charter indicate, ultimately, we are accountable to we the peoples of the United Nations. We want to hear from people all around the world, especially from youth. We want to hear your concerns and hopes, what you want the future to look like, and what your expectations are of global cooperation. We value every person's perspective, as everyone is a stakeholder in multilateralism, and everyone suffers when it does not work well. We really appreciate the time you're taking for the discussion. We will attentively read the summary of your dialogue, and it will be included in our analysis of all survey and dialogues data we receive throughout 2020. It will feed into a report presented at the official commemoration of the UN 75th anniversary on 21 September 2020, and a final report in January 2021. The General Assembly will be adopting a forward-looking political declaration on the occasion of the 75th anniversary and will be tasking the Secretary General to put it into effect. Your inputs can help shape that agenda going forward. We wish you a stimulating discussion, and we're looking forward to learning of the outcomes. Please also take the UN 75 one-minute survey and share it widely with your colleagues, friends, and family so that we can include as many voices as possible. Together, we can be the change we want to see in the world. Thank you.
Wow, what an inspirational video. So during that time, if you haven't already, you can click on the link that's in the chat box, and I will ask Joel and Dali to come back, put their video on for the open dialogue. So if anyone has any issues with accessing the Miro board, please let us know in the chat. We already have a couple of people in the Miro board, and you can see that if you're in the Miro board itself, you can see that there's a bunch of sticky notes and squares. Please do not delete anything. If you want to add any comments, you can on the sticky notes. If you want to add more sticky notes, you can copy and paste. But during this time, we will be facilitating the open dialogue. So if I'll pass on to Dali to chat about the dialogue and anything else you'd like to add before we ask our delegates for your feedback and any comments.
Thank you. I don't have a great deal to add. I think Fabrizio made it fairly clear in that video. But yes, basically, so what the dialogues are about, they're kind of focus groups for us to gain a bit more depth of perspectives than through the survey, which obviously is quite limited. It takes 1 to 2 minutes to fill in. So even though that's very useful feedback for us, it's obviously limited. It doesn't give us a great deal of depth. So these dialogues are meant to be focus groups of sorts. We ask afterwards that organizers of a dialogue submit a brief summary per an online template that we have. And that will then feed into our overall analysis. Obviously, it can no longer feed into that report on the 21st of September because that was published yesterday. But there will again be another report in January, which will be the one taken forward for the next 25 years of the UN. So absolutely, the summary will be read by the SG's office and fed into this report, roadmap for the future. So do please share your perspectives. And if I may also add, if anybody's interested to host dialogues of their own afterwards I don't know what you all do or where you all come from, but anyone is always welcome to host a dialogue. So I'll actually put my email in the chat box as well. If anybody else wants to host a dialogue after this one in the next few weeks, you're welcome to reach out to me. Thanks, and again, looking forward to hearing from you.
Awesome, thanks, Dali. So during this time, if any delegate would like to speak their feedback, so unmute themselves, and I think I'm getting a bit of feedback. I'm not sure where that's coming from. Anyways, so if anyone would like to unmute themselves and voice their feedback, please feel free to. We'll be monitoring the Zoom chat and the Zoom meeting itself. But in the meantime, you can head over to the Miro board. Please let us know if you cannot access it, we can help you. If not, we'll go straight into the first question. So the first question is, what should the international community prioritize to recover better from the pandemic? So if you want to respond to this question, you can click on the sticky note, you can double click and you can start typing whatever you want to type. You can use more than one sticky note. And if you want to have a conversation during this time, if you're still trying to formulate your answer, you can definitely unmute and form a dialogue with us. We're definitely open for discussion. So Joel, if you want to add anything, yeah, feel free to.
Thanks, Ashara, and thanks for setting up that awesome thing online. I have a question for Dali, if you can answer. I'm really curious. You mentioned the preliminary report has been sort of, finalized with all the initial responses to the dialogues. Are you happy to give us a brief overview of what? Awesome. Happy to give us a brief overview of what people are saying across the world, or is it too early to tell?
Sure. No, I mean, I was actually reading it now because Fabrizio will be giving a speech on the findings for the Latin American region. So I was looking through the report again to make sure that I find the stuff for Latin America. But yes, there are 10 key findings of the reports on page 6. So you're also welcome to go check it out. I mean, obviously, right, it was difficult to distill a through line because we had engagement from more than 1 million people in all 193 member states of the UN. Obviously, people have different priorities around the world. But by and large, I think 2 key observations, or 3 key observations really, from the survey at least, were that people's number 1 priority is universal access to healthcare, which did not really come as a surprise given the pandemic. Equally importantly to that was access to basic services, healthcare, education, water, housing, people's basic concerns that affect their day-to-day life. But also, no less important, climate change. Climate change was the single number 1 overriding challenge that people see in the short, medium, long term, regardless of age group, but particularly among the 16 to 30 age group. Also relevant for us, one of the questions in the survey and also in the dialogue is, how do people feel about the necessity for global cooperation to tackle these shared challenges? 87% of survey responders said that global cooperation is vital to go forward, which
Not
obviously we're
the UN survey, I guess, yeah.
And an important thing to note, obviously, is the survey was by self-selection, right? So people chose to take the survey. This was not a social scientific process, which is important to note because in all likelihood, the people who would take the survey are people who already are predisposed to positive feelings about institutions and global cooperation. However, in order to also, be rigorous and social scientific about this and get perspectives regardless of whether people are predisposed to sympathetic feelings towards us, we also ran a parallel process whereby we had 2 big polling companies, Pew and the e-MUN, which are 2 big polling companies that operate worldwide. They also did proper representative sampling of people around the world in I think it was 7 countries in different regions. And by and large, the findings from that polling exercise were similar to our survey, which indicates that even though it was through self-selection, this is fairly representative of what people think in the world. So when people say that they think that global cooperation is vital, that's not just members of UN associations that take the survey. It is what people believe. yeah, that's my reflections on the report in a nutshell.
Thank you. It makes sense. And I, with no knowledge of the report, expected health to be right up there, given one of the big things we focus on in UNAA in Australia is highlighting the discrepancy between countries like Australia who have healthcare we can take for granted and not have to worry that if you get COVID, that there's a bill coming, because there's not, because it's all covered, it's free, the healthcare that comes. And then countries, even like America, who may not have the system in place where people feel comfortable that if they get sick, they get universal healthcare. So that's, I'm not surprised at all of that. It's awesome that, you know, people are engaging, and over 1 million people is quite impressive.
Thanks. And you know, when there was the press release or the press briefing last Thursday, it was a closed press briefing, you know, not speaking on background and all that. Most of the reporters in the room or on the Zoom room were, you know, American, like CNN and all that. And one of the key questions was, are you purposefully trying to snub the Trump administration? Because obviously when you come with saying people should have access to healthcare, that's you know, one of the 2-3 major points of contention in the U.S. political system. The response is no. This is not a snub to anyone. This is just representative of what people are saying. And yeah, no, we'll see how Trump responds to it. He is speaking today, actually, at 9 a.m. New York time. So I'm not sure how. It's probably very late for you guys in Australia. But yeah, something to watch.
Yeah, and given his last UNGA speech was interesting. And one of the rare times.
Now it's an election year, so the fear is that he's gonna throw red meat to his base. You know, say random complete things that make no sense, but which will be popular among his base. Like he's gonna stand there and say, you all don't want me to put America first, but I'm gonna do it anyway. Stop
negative
with your
globalist.
Stop with your world government.
You
know, who knows? We'll see.
It's another question I had for you guys. I'm quite interested in understanding where the people who responded to this come from, because we have seen a bit of a trend, you know, of countries sliding to nationalistic tendencies that generally follow a line of, or include a line, especially of international organizations have too much control. We need to take back control, et cetera, et cetera. So are you seeing that, you know, your respondents to this, the dialogues are coming from countries that are, I guess, more politically open to international organizations? As you said, it's self-assessed and people who do it are actually already fans. But is there like a bit of a country disparity between countries who are already, like, you know, publicly pro or anti-UN?
So I don't have it clearly in my mind. I would have to check the data. But from what I recall, so the country with the most engagement in terms of both survey and dialogues was India, which is not all that surprising given that it's you know, the second largest population in the world. We actually didn't have that much engagement from China. I think that's partly language barrier, partly that the government has some regulations about participation in surveys, things like that. But one point that the USG Fabrizio wants to make with this is that although we all recognize this global rise in populism and nationalism, all that, as one of the key trends of the world today, it may just be that they are the loudest and not necessarily the most widespread and representative. You know, again, it is difficult to assess entirely how representative this report is. 1 million survey responses is still, you know, less than 0.1% of the global population. But again, with the formal polling as well, we get people's views around the world. And what we observe is that this narrative about populism, taking back control and all that, it's obviously true, and it's something important to take into account. One big recommendation from a prominent think tank was that the Secretary General should appoint an expert advisory group on inclusive global governance to go forward and craft a global governance system where the fruits of globalization are spread more equally within societies. But it does, again, one takeaway from the report is that it takes issue, in a sense, and brings into question this narrative about populism, nationalism, and all that.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Probably a good chance to say anybody who's watching wants to unmute themselves and ask a question. It'd be awesome to get you involved. This is a dialogue, and I'm happy to ask Dali questions for the remainder, I think, because I have a lot of questions, but I'd love to hear from you guys, especially as you're coming into your MUN deliberations and exercises.
I just wanted to add that as you both were talking, there's a lot of other people on the Miro board, but I'd just like to add that for those who are still kind of in the box for question 1, you don't have to worry about adding more sticky notes or kind of neatening up the notes. The whole point of the exercise is that it's an online whiteboard, so it's kind of just like sticking up a sticky note on a whiteboard. They don't have to be completely perfect or in like straight lines, so it's completely fine if they're kind of haphazard. If anyone wants to ask, unmute themselves and put on your video and ask or give your feedback verbally, you're more than welcome to do so. We also have Sarah, who's part of the UNYP team, helping to scribe any feedback that's given verbally. So if anyone does want to unmute and put their video on, you're more than welcome to.
Mariam Nazif has your hand raised. Are you going to ask a question?
I actually want to give some feedback, or I want to say something. So this is, I think, my 3rd time participating in a UN75 dialogue. My first dialogue was with the local UN habitat in the country. So, and I just wanted to say that I've done the UN75 survey, and I felt that it was it was a little bit limited in terms of how much response we can give and what it felt like with regards to like how I really felt about UN75 and how I really felt about the SDGs. So I just wanted to say that the discussion board on Miro, the questions that are being asked, because I'm comparing this to my experience with UN Habitat, which was also obviously very, very fruitful. But with regards to this discussion board, I really like that the questions are very specific, and they have a lot to do with how we perceive, like what our thoughts and what our fears are and what we really want to see attain. And I don't think we get that kind of depth with the UN75 survey. So I'm really happy to hear that these questions are actually going to be, gonna get somewhere.
Thank you, that's awesome feedback. And yeah, Shara on screen now is the brains behind that.
If I can just add, Mariam, thanks very much for that feedback. The UN75 initiative is decentralized, right? So again, anybody can host a dialogue, and it's very much encouraged to. So if you, having partaken in free dialogues, you feel that there's a way that you would do this, please do so. And you can you can write and submit the feedback form, and we will definitely read it. So please do.
All right, very well noted. Thank you.
So where are you from, Mariam?
I'm from Lebanon.
Awesome, welcome.
Thank
you. And on that note, if anyone else would like to give their feedback or verbally give their responses to any of the questions, you're more than welcome to. I would just like to remind all the delegates that to move on to the next question, if you haven't already, there is 7 questions, with one of them being just if you have any comments or feedback. So question number 7 is like an open question, but questions 1 to 6 are quite specific. And I'm seeing a lot of blank sticky notes. So you can give your answers through Miro, or you can verbally present them. So if anyone else would like to unmute, please feel free to.
Shara, I just wanted to ask, when this is being submitted, what's it going to look like? Is there a certain amount of characters that have to be submitted? And are you going to collaborate everyone's ideas and put it into a submission? Or are we going to come to a consensus on every question?
That's a good question. So what I'm seeing so far on the Miro board is that for question 1, for example, there's a lot of answers there. And I haven't looked at all of them specifically, but some of them are similar answers. And because the survey itself has a character limit of 750, what we'll do is we'll actually collate them all together, write like a paragraph for all, make sure the key points that everyone's submitted is there, and ensure that there's no repeat answers per response. But for the actual submission of these responses from this delegate group, because there's such a variety of answers, we'll be, like Sarah is also ascribing some of the answers that may be verbally spoken. So we'll try our best to summarize them and reflect the diversity of responses in the actual submission for this delegate group.
Thank you very much.
Does anyone else have any questions or wants to unmute?
I thought that there was 2 questions that actually sort of correlated in a way. So what are the fears for the, I forget the exact number, 2045 year, and also how does the UN face these challenges? I think that my fears actually are determined on how the UN faces these challenges. So I think it's all part of a larger discussion that can be intertwined and mirrored off one another. Healthcare and a welfare system, I think, is something that we all kind of have a consensus on. We all agree that this is really important. But if that can't be achieved and resources can't be distributed globally, then that's probably my biggest fear for 2045.
Well, if you want my 2 cents worth, I think the short answer is together or not at all. We're quite biased towards collaboration and cooperation as a UN volunteer NGO, but the evidence sort of backs up the view that these bigger issues are getting harder to solve at a nation level, and that is climate change, which is intersecting with refugee movements, which is intersecting with weather patterns and pandemics and global food shortages and supply disruptions. So there's no outcome where less cooperation is better. All those issues will have to be sorted at international level, and that makes it incredibly difficult. It makes it incredibly hard to get 193 people to agree on priorities and on, exactly what we mentioned there, where the priorities for health issues lie, given that some countries are more advanced and some countries are maybe more reluctant to go down that benefits everyone model. But my short answer is together or not at all. I saw a hand pop up.
Yes, we have another delegate who wants to speak. Yeah, please go ahead.
And if you could say your name and which country you're from, it'd be awesome to find out where everyone's joining from.
I have a question. It's Millennium again. I have a question because I was just thinking about what Tamara said about, and what you were saying, Joel, about global cooperation. It's one of the areas that I've been investigating very recently. And it's basically, and I'm talking about this from, as a Lebanese in Lebanon, I'm taking a look at the movements on the ground. And one of the things that I've been noticing lately is that there has been a rise of grassroots efforts and grassroots movements in the country. And while most of them seem to be aligned with the SDGs, there is, in my opinion, there's poor alignment on the long term, in the long run, and a lack of sustainability with regards to alignment with the UN SDGs, or even, in my country it doesn't apply, but in other countries, I'm sure, with key national plans. So in that case, would grassroots movements be more harmful in the long run when it comes to attaining the SDGs, or do you feel like it can get under control? Because this is one of my major concerns, I feel, especially in a country where, you know, there's not a lot of, there's no one party that kind of monitors what all these initiatives and movements are doing.
Yeah, I think off the top of my head, well, grassroots movements are essential, and if they don't happen, nothing changes. I don't think you could name any, you know, large change in world history, whether it's workers' rights, women's rights, that hasn't really been forced by a grassroots movement. And maybe they morph into more organized political campaigns towards, you know, achieving their goal, but all of them start just people talking, you know, gathering in the street to say this is what we think, and then yeah, building a consensus from that. So grassroots is where it has to start. I don't think the current model of, you know, potentially billionaires saying I have a ton of money, I'll fix this problem, is quite sustainable. I think that's less sustainable than, you know, the people, and the UN is with people. So grassroots has to be there, and really is the power behind all change, because as you know, we know politicians or politics is doing what is possible, and I think politicians will always act in, you know, I hope sincerely, in the interest of the majority of people. And if it becomes quite clear that enough people think a certain way, it's pretty interesting, especially in countries like Australia, how quickly political sentiment can shift. And it just is a critical mass question. So yeah, I think grassroots is essential, and always will be.
I'd like to quickly add to that, because that's an excellent question. And it's definitely different per region. So in Australia it's different, in New Zealand, in India it's different. So aside from the, you know, the volunteer work I do with UNYP Queensland, I work in the grassroots sector. I work in social enterprise, the social enterprise sector, which is typically known as the grassroots sector, as it's a, you know, quote unquote unconventional side of business. But a lot of these people first initially start as volunteers and then build up the business, so then it builds up a revenue to then pay everyone. And same with not-for-profits or certain NGOs. But, you know, and again, it's country specific, but the question around whether they're like localizing or have a grasp around SDGs, and whether they have a kind of aim or a focus towards the SDGs, which brings them towards the UN agenda, you know, sometimes, at least in my experience and exposure in the grassroots sector, it's not there. There's no dialogue between someone who has that knowledge to bring into the grassroots sector. And if there is, it's usually in the form of like organizational training or, you know, upskilling. And so from Joel's question, which he sent me, where do we go from here? It's actually around, you know, a kind of what I think is a top-down and bottom-up approach. I think having these kind of UN75 dialogues is super important, because then you can voice your perspective and your opinion, and it kind of shows that what's missing. Why do we need people coming into the grassroots sector to then explain what the SDGs do, or how their grassroots organization can be better aligned towards a specific SDG or a specific SDG target? And yeah, and it kind of goes around the narrative of, well, there are certain small businesses who don't know how to be sustainable. And the reason why is because they're so busy building up their business, you know, and this is one reason, that they don't have the foresight to then bring other people in to then teach them how to, you know, abide by SDGs or align themselves with the SDGs. So that's a really great question, and definitely something that a lot of people are working on, but I guess the communications could be better. And definitely it's a two-way street of questions. I did see.
Sorry, no, quickly, sustainability is quite key, because a lot of grassroots movements can fall over. They get too big, and you know, they don't have the structures in place with the bureaucracy and organization required to really get to the next level of, you know, critical mass and then lobbying in the most efficient direction. One of the things we focus on here at UNYP really is shining a light on local groups who do the important work already. And there's a lot of awesome organizations that don't get the recognition they need. And these are the grassroots movements that help refugees, homeless people, climate change, local efforts, who don't get the spotlight that they need to, as I said, progress into a bigger group So we focus very heavily on partnering with these groups to use the UN branding, the SDG branding to highlight what they're doing and really try and funnel some, volunteer money and time essentially to these groups. So that's what we try to do, is really to help those groups get off the ground and be sustainable, and using the UN marketing sort of helps.
I just saw someone's hand. So there's two hands up and there's also a question in the comments. I saw Patrick first. I'll ask him to unmute. And if you're comfortable, Patrick, you can also put your video on.
And let me bring this down. Yes.
Hi.
Hi. Hello. Good morning. Good evening. Good afternoon to everybody around the world. I just wanted to ask, when we do Model United Nations and generally any other plan, there are some ideas that look great on paper, but are actually terribly executed in real life. So one of the things I'm sure many of us are familiar is, for example, trickle-down economics and the carbon tax, which corporations can just pay off. Do you know any other examples in real life in the United Nations you see people keep proposing, but will probably be shut down? Thank you.
It's a very important and sort of impossible to answer question. Just as a side plug, our committee last week, I don't know what day of the week it is, last week held an event on intergenerational economics with some leading economists here in Australia, talking about this issue of young people and where the economic future lies if we go down the path of investing in the wrong areas. Trickle-down economics, again, I'm not an economist, just an enthusiast, but has been around for a long time and seems to keep getting trotted out as a potential source of relief for all areas of the economy. I don't personally believe it works. I think it's been proven to fail a lot of times, but there is a certain strength. And if you're interested, one of our speakers, John Quiggin, wrote a book called Zombie Economics on this exact issue about ideas, and his zombie references, ideas that refuse to die and sort of keep coming back to life, trickle down being one of them. But those, again, the issue is at the UN, there's 193 different countries represented by different people with different, different starting points of where their countries are, different goals for what they want to get out of the UN. Some countries genuinely want to participate and help. Some countries maybe are looking to, boost their own standing or leverage some other benefits from it. And some countries are not really engaged or feel they're too small and, are sort of there as observers. So some ideas that look good on paper that haven't worked in history, I think personally can be repetitively engaged because the people at the top of the decision-making trees are the same. And they have been the same since 1945. And historically that was white men from Western countries. It's UN's much better now at being a truer reflection of the people, all the people, not just the white male people of the Western nations who set it up initially. But there's still a long way to go in making sure that people at the top of the UN have the diverse experience and life story of the people that their policies will serve. So some people may genuinely believe that trickle-down economics works because they come from a background where they've never had to worry about money. Clearly, it doesn't work for people who come from the other end of the spectrum and do worry about money. And this is a long way of saying a short answer, which is you need to ensure that people making choices have as diverse range of ideas as possible to make sure that, ideas that clearly don't work don't keep getting repeated, which is a nice segue I just realized into the UN75 dialogues. And that's the point of this discussion, is making sure that everybody's idea is heard. As Dali said, there's been 1 million views heard already, but I guess we're here to get some more to make sure that these ideas that don't work go away for good.
And we have another hand up from Sam. And Sam, if you'd like to, you can also put your video on.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yeah, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I just wanted to ask a question that might be a bit off topic or a bit off the previous questions that have been asked. And this is something that has to relate to the youth, their empowerment and their participation in our communities today. And this might just relate to the community that I'm in. And it's that the youth seem to have the problem where they are not resilient to change. And they choose to not accept the fact that we should be aiming for a better world. Some just assume that, okay, these things might not be our concerns, or it might be too late for me to make a change. Some just don't even try in the first place and believe that the efforts that some other members in the community of the youth are doing might be useless or deem them unnecessary. And I know it's a matter of prioritization to some, but it's just that, and I'm just going to explain this in terms of the community that we have in Lebanon. Simple things like Model UN are very rarely accepted. Yes, there is a high participation number, but a very small percentage of this youth actually ends up acting upon that and choosing to take it into further parts of their lives. So I just wanted to see how is it that to a certain extent we can get the youth to engage more in our communities, how we can get them to become resilient to change and be part of the change, not just people that are watching it and actually to a certain extent impeding this progress.
Before we answer that, I wonder if other people in the line feel this way as well, like that. It's a really good point, Sam, and I think that's why all of us are volunteering in some way or another, right? Because we want to make sure that there is some platform for youth, but yeah, I'm just interested to hear if everyone else, if you, like, you don't have to say, like, if you don't want to, but if you all feel like that, that you feel that there's no empowerment.
Precisely, I'm interested in knowing if anyone else struggles the same way that to a certain extent we struggle in our communities.
Yeah.
If I may,
yeah, go ahead.
Hi, Maxton. Sam has made a very valid point, and it's quite relevant, especially to this discussion. Oftentimes we talk about youth empowerment, youth involvement in the conversation, but at the top of the spectrum, there's a massive disconnect between youth and leadership and those in authority. And oftentimes we see that within the UN. And I would make a very provocative comment regarding the Office of the Envoy on Youth. We are championing youth, and I've been heavily involved at the senior levels of the UN over the last 3 years, and I've witnessed this. We talk about having an office for young people, but then we have an office for young people that is not funded. You know, so is this sort of like a tokenist approach that we take into to try and show up some sort of support for young people? We often have dialogues. Yes, e-MUN is a fantastic way where we have these, you know, really important discussions, you know, on global affairs. But what happens next? You know, we risk continuing to become a talking shop with no action. And with 10 years remaining for us to achieve this ambitious 2030 agenda, we are almost nowhere quarter of that way of achieving these goals. So what message are we sending to the young people for them to remain, you know, inspired, to remain fired up, you know, to start making actions, you know, at grassroots level, you know, considering the different cultural nuances, you know, around the SDGs. You know, climate change may be important for me here in the United Kingdom, but it may not be a priority for you in Australia, or for you in Lebanon, or for you in South Africa. So what are your priorities? What is the priority of the United Nations? You know, having another dialogue, what does that mean for us? You know, in 2025, does that mean that we're going to be coming up with something different from the MDGs or the SDGs? What is it going to be next? What other DGs is going to come after that? And someone made a point earlier about the importance of grassroots organizations, and I saw Miriam mention the risk of these grassroots organizations faded into oblivion. Again, you know, what is the message that we're sending for these organizations, you know, to remain relevant? You know, it's about education. You know, are we giving them the right education? You know, are we training them in accountability? I mean, there are fantastic organizations at grassroots level that are doing great things on the SDGs, but at a UN level, who knows this information? Who holds this information? No one. Again, there are fantastic youth organizations that are championing the cause, you know, for climate change, for poverty eradication, for FGM, you know, for gender equality, but we know nothing about them. mean, the UN has this civil society spectrum where NGOs can plug into that and become affiliated with the United Nations. But again, someone talked about information sharing. These organizations do not know that they can become, partners with the United Nations. I mean, the UN in Australia, I think you are affiliated with the DGC. But the grassroots organization, who is giving them this information? And who's keeping track of this and what they are doing? No one. So again, we can always talk about, and I'm always championing for youth advancement, but I get a bit wary when the UN, for example, and I do love the United Nations, and what it stands for, but I get a bit wary when we talk about young people, they don't want to do this, they don't want to do that. And Sam is right by saying, we do get tired and fed up because we feel as though, we have been taken out of the equation. So I guess my comment on this is, during this dialogue and the UN75 is, how do we transform the UN from a talking shop to an action shop? Because that is hugely lacking.
My very brief point is, we're trying, especially us in the YPs, trying really hard to engage those groups and, as you said, get it into a more action-based outcome. But I think Dali is probably the best person to ask about how the UN is moving to better support youth voices in a practical way that's not just talking and more supporting actual action.
I'm not sure if, oh no, Dali's here, great.
No, I've been listening. Very good, interesting stuff to hear. I mean, a lot to unpack there, but a few key thoughts that jump to mind to me. I do think that one of the most noticeable trends within the UN, and when I say within the UN, I mean in the Secretariat, right? The UN is multiple things when we use that one label. But in terms of the UN Secretariat and the system more widely, so including the agencies like UNICEF, WHO, and all that, a very noticeable trend over the last few years is serious, genuine, sustained effort to make more space for young people. So to empower young people, but also give them the tools and the space to empower themselves. In 2013, the former Secretary General Ban Ki-moon launched the Youth Envoy's Office. So there is now the Secretary General's Envoy on Youth, who is themselves a young person. I think that Jayathma, the current post holder, is now something like 29 years old. She was 26 at the time of her appointment. And she does carry the rank of UN Under Secretary General. Being the highest rank that you can reach in the UN Secretariat, apart from the SG and the Deputy SG. So Jayathma has a seat in the UN Chief Executive Board of Coordination, and her mandate is to streamline the importance of youth engagement, youth participation, and empowerment throughout the UN system. Also noteworthy, in 2015, the UN Security Council passed the Youth, Peace and Security Agenda, recognizing young people as very important actors for peace. There used to be a narrative before that, which was challenged by youth groups around the world, that young people are agents of destabilization because young people are often the ones carrying the guns in conflicts. They are the ones protesting in the Arab Spring, which personally, I think is a positive, but obviously some governments see that as a negative. But so the Security Council passed a Youth, Peace and Security Agenda, which has in the last 5 years led to a paradigm shift about the role of young people, not as destabilizing actors, but as proper partners for the achievement of peace and for sustaining peace. In 2018, Jayathma, with the active support of Antonio Guterres, who, if you look at his speeches, he always says that where he sees hope, it is in the young generation. But so in 2018, JAFMA has passed the Youth 2030, the first system-wide strategy for young people throughout the UN system. So I would encourage you to check that out, Youth 2030. It serves to guide the entire UN bureaucracy on and set goals for the participation of young people. And to just give one more example, you know, Guterres has really staked his reputation and has really tried to do a lot on addressing the climate crisis. He is obviously, as everybody is in the UN, and not just in the UN, but in the world at large, getting you know, frustrated with the lack of action in that field. In part to help empower young people and also to put a bit more pressure on leaders, taking inspiration from Greta, the SG appointed a new youth advisory group on climate change. So there are now 7 young people between the ages of 18 to 28 advising the SG on climate change, and they all come from different regions. That's all to say that the UN does a great deal to put young people more at the center. Where you may get frustrated in the lack of progress, so to speak, it's not coming from us. It's not from the UN Secretariat. It's from the member states. And ultimately, you know, when we say the UN, the Secretariat can only do so much. The real political leadership and the potential for action, more than talk, comes from the member states. It is difficult, you know, to get 193 countries, to get them seized on one common agenda, and then to get them to put action where their words may be. You know, that's the continuous struggle, so to say. And yeah, the only way to really get political action to be taken is from grassroots movements, is from young people around the world. Again, I think that the 2 single most important actions taken around the world that have led to this, you know, opening of the UN to young people was the Arab Spring, which was led by young people, and 2, really it was Greta, and seeing that young person's voice, which again has also led to this youth advisor group. I'm saying a lot of stuff. I don't know if I have anything more to say. I'll leave it there.
No, that's great. Thank you so much, Dali. I mean, that question itself could be its whole own dialogue, an own discussion. But we just being conscious of time, and also that someone else has raised their hand. I think Patrick has raised their hand, so I'll ask you to, oh, wait, hang on. Ask you to unmute, and feel free to put your video on if you want to.
Oh, yes, no worries. I actually wanted, my question was similar to Dalit and Hov's comment about, you know, finding a common agenda. And I wanted to ask, you know, there are many different IR schools of thought. You have realism, liberalism, structuralism, post-positivism, too many to count. And I wanted to know, do you see a global shift towards some areas or more than others? And do you believe that even then there's a common ground upon which everybody can agree upon? Thank you.
Could I ask you to put that question in as few words as possible, just because, you know, it's quite broad, so I want to make sure that I answer the essence.
Yes, of course. Summarized, do you believe that despite the different worldviews or point of views each nation uses on the international and on the national scale, there is still some common ground or global shift towards specific viewpoints more than others?
You know, I think it's very difficult to say, and I think that is one of the key questions of the century coming up. You know, I guess one of the key narratives right now about in international affairs, right, is the emerging polarity between the U.S. and this democratic camp that supports human rights and this the liberal world order and all that, and the camp led by China about authoritarian straight state-driven capitalism, surveillance, and all that. Is that going to lead to a Cold War again? Maybe it will. I don't know, right? But I think that is most important in terms of wondering whether there will be a common agenda. For sure, the common agenda that we've had for the last few decades, which was driven by and underwritten by U.S. Power, is waning. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's important to know that even in the Cold War, there were significant points of cooperation, especially in health, like polio, decolonization, and all that. So even if the world is drifting more apart, there will definitely be important points of cooperation. I think also an important emerging role for the UN, which I think the SG is also increasingly conscious of, is for the UN is going to need to be a platform, not just for states, but for companies, for civil society, for all kinds of different actors. And I guess that the task for the SG going forward, I mean, but I think the SG, it could be the Secretary General 30 years from now, but will precisely be to try to find areas of potential cooperation in the vast fragmentation and all that. Will that SG be successful? Will the international community be able to converge on certain things? I don't know. I think only time can tell.
I think also, to add to Dali's answer, if you're talking about the UN, historically it's been a clash of ideologies, and two big ones being constructivism, is there a point to working together, fix problems, and realism, a country's always going to act in their own self-interest. I think, and Dali is right to mention the Cold War, when the issue became so big that, and this is obviously, the advent of nuclear weapons that could travel across continents, when the issue became so big that it was in a country's realist interest to engage in that discussion at the international level, it really smushed those two things together, and you couldn't engage on the issue without factoring in international cooperation. I think climate change will be the issue of this, well, it is the issue of this century, and has to be for a lot of reasons, but climate change is so big, and we're already seeing massive global, supply chain breakdowns, weather events, that it is a perfect culmination, in my opinion, of a constructivist issue of how do we work together to fix this problem, and also a realist issue of if we don't, your interests will be directly affected. And even countries that have been, strongly historically realist, especially in a security sense, like the US, are now engaging on these issues quite strongly, even if not at a national political level. Like US military is engaging quite strongly on partnering to protect its military assets, and that it's quite a cynical and strategic view. But there's no escaping the fact that this is now there are some global issues that really transcend the traditional. No, that's an international issue. No, this is a realist issue. And those are the big issues like nuclear weapons and climate change. So I think there's already seen good progress on that. Clearly nowhere near enough, but I genuinely hope and believe that climate change will be the issue this next decade. That means you can't hide behind a theoretical lens, because it's a real problem that affects everybody. So that's my hope.
And just on that, if anyone else has any other questions, please feel free to ask. Just being conscious of time as well, because we will be closing this in a few minutes. So if you have any other questions, please feel free to ask. And also on the Miro board, you're welcome to continue adding your responses after this meeting finishes, because it will be open. But again, once you've finished on the mirror board, please exit. It does save automatically, so don't worry about losing your answers. Wonders of technology. So if anyone else has a question, please raise your hand or unmute, and yeah, we can get going from there. And yes, to Maxton's comment, no more unpaid internships. I think that should be a universal thing, not just at the UN. And it kind of goes back, and just very quickly, it kind of goes back to the comment and the questions that was raised by a few others around recognizing youth and their knowledge. It's something that one of the areas I work in is in intergenerational equity, which kind of ties into the whole concept of sustainable development, but not the concept of sustainable development in the SDGs, but sustainable development in the concept of climate change and environmental and sociology, which is around recognizing the knowledge and the lived experience that young people bring, in that they're, of course, experts in their own experience, but they bring a completely different perspective to the table. And that is something that, as all of you have noticed, is being recognized more, especially through these dialogues. I will put later in the chat box a link to a professor who's actually doing a lot of research on the impact of youth dialogues in the UN and what it means for even decision making and dialogues, higher level dialogues. Yeah, but if anyone else has, yeah, go ahead.
That sounds so brilliant, Ashara. I feel like every single person on this line would really benefit from reading that article.
Also on Docs Scotland's great article, I'm looking forward to reading it too. Docs Scotland's comment, it is a vicious cycle, the unpaid internships, especially after finishing undergrad and really having no choice but to do this sort of work if you want to get into that area. It creates any system that has ultimate control over someone creates abuse. The other side issue is the physical makeup of the UN. I touched on the history of it being a quite wealthy nations, white men at the top sort of situation. And then that also ties into the fact that where their headquarters are located in New York and Geneva, the two big ones, and quite expensive places to live. And again, I don't have a solution for it, but maybe the solution is spreading out headquarters away from those expensive places. But you're right.
Can I offer two reflections on the question of unpaid internships, by the way. One is if you're interested in that, and I don't know who it was that asked the question, but there is actually something called the Fair Internship Initiative, which was started in 2015 or 2016 by a bunch of unpaid UN interns at the time, who were getting frustrated by that. I mean, I think it's basically a Facebook group at the moment, but you can join it. And I went to a couple of those meetings actually. And yeah, it's always interns within UN headquarters, not just interns, but also staff making arguments. On the other side of that, the fact that the UN offers unpaid internships, although it is also worth mentioning that some agencies have phased out. I think, for example, the International Organization for Migration now pays all its interns. But the fact that the UN offers unpaid internships, it is at a deeper problem with UN. It's chronic underfinancing. No senior UN staff member would say, no, we should, interns don't deserve money or something like that. It's not a question of convincing anyone that it's important. The UN's operating budget is less than that of the police department of New York City. It's $6.5 billion. Which sounds like but it's basically nothing, right? So many countries are just not paying their dues. I think, for example, the US at the moment, which is the largest contributor, is behind on $3.5 billion of contributions. And at the moment, actually, the UN is facing its worst financial crisis of its own for at least the last 20 years. And the SG really made a, you know, he wasn't holding back the last time that he presented the budget. He basically said, this is, you know, this is the worst crisis financially for the UN in at least a couple of decades. I may not be able to pay staff, you know. So one of the points made in the 75th anniversary declaration that was adopted yesterday is sustainable financing of the UN system. The United Nations needs sufficient financing. It needs predictable financing. It needs countries to pay their dues at the time when the dues are due. And it needs innovative mechanisms to make sure that UN initiatives are paid. So anyway, that's, I'm just trying to say that the fact that internships are unpaid is a symptom of a bigger problem about the UN's financing, and you know, the only way to really solve that issue is political pressure on member states to actually, you know, make sure that the UN has enough money.
Thank you, Dali, and that's actually right on time to conclude this event, because it's actually right on the, almost right on the hour. So thank you so much to everyone who's participated, to all the delegates who put their feedback on the Miro board, to Dali and to Joel for your presentations and for your time. I know it's late for us over here, and it's early in the morning for other people, and in the afternoon for some others. So thank you all for participating. Thank you to Tamara for chatting with us, connecting and making this possible, as well as the UNYP team who's not on the video. So Sarah, who's behind the screen, and a few others who's helped for this. And thank you once again to everyone who's participated for this workshop. If you still want to answer or put any feedback on the Miro board, it's still open. I noticed a few people are still on there, so don't stress that you'll lose your answers. They'll still be on there. Thank you.
Thanks everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.